And I'm now about to click on the record button to record the session, to which I hope no one has any objections. Oh, we are recording.
Great.
I think, yes.
Cool.
Just check. Yeah, Krishna's started it. Thank you. Thanks, Krishna.
Okay, can you see the hold screen then?
Yeah, we can do. Did you want me to? Yeah.
Oh,
So
no,
we
that's
just
fine.
had the first No Space for Hate, which is the initiative that we've been promoting as part of decolonising DMU and equality, diversity and inclusivity across the university. Thanks, Richard. Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Kay. And thanks to for the invite to speak at this. It's really, really important work, and I think De Montfort's not only one of the most kind of diverse demographics in terms of like students and staff in the country, but I think it's with the Stephen Lawrence Centre and everything, it's really at the forefront of this sort of movement to decolonize. So I don't know, it's just an honor to speak at this event, and it's something I'm passionate about and something that I've been trying to instill into my own curriculum within the School of Fashion and Textiles. I'm just going to give everyone only a quick flavour of all of this this afternoon. I'm going to try and keep it to half an hour if I can and leave space to questions. I might run on a bit. I have a tendency to lines of flight or ideas for a walk. But anyway, this is in the background. This is a campaign by an activist group called Fashion Revolution, who are working at the moment. They're an awesome group that I try and get my students to look at. The campaign is particularly this sort of photojournalistic campaign where they get garment workers in the global south to hold up signs saying, I made your clothes, as a way of, introducing transparency into the supply chain and make us realize that our kind of £5, £5 t-shirts or whatever, the unbeatably cheap dress that you see in Zara actually come at a human cost. And that cost is, the exploitation of actual people, So it's making this kind of exploitative labor and this exploitative relationship of the West and the Western fashion system and the global South kind of transparent. So there are people working within fashion at the moment, activists and pioneers who are really attempting to kind of, shine a light on the bad practices of the West, or continued bad practices of the West, particularly within fast fashion. And these are one fast fashion revolution. But obviously, there's a wider decolonizing movement, which DMU is now part of, and stems to the Rhodes Must Fall protests initially in Cape Town, and then in Oxford here, you can just see the white supremacist Cecil Rhodes standing above the gateways there of the Oxford College. And of course, all of our university system is built on colonialism to a certain extent, if not the actual material wealth of colonial exploitation or gain from kind of colonial exploitation, but then the kind of legacy of that, which is about white ideas or white academics becoming more privileged than all of the rest. So what I'm going to talk about today is maybe ways in which people have been trying to reverse that kind of white privilege, reverse those systems of power within fashion, within the academy, but also within the industry. So the fashion industry actually, at the same time as being massively exploitative, has really had its own kind of, its own kind of Rhodes Must Fall moment, its own kind of Me Too moment. And that came earlier than the Rhodes Must Fall campaign in 2013, which you probably will have all heard about, the collapse of the Rana Plaza garment factory in Bangladesh. If you don't, the garment workers were basically forced to work under worse than slave labor conditions. If they ever didn't turn up for work, they would be sacked immediately. Losing this job is worse than a kind of death sentence for a lot of these workers. So on one day, a bunch of them complained. They said they'd never go into the factory because it had a big crack down the wall. The boss of the factory said that if you don't go in, you'll all have your month's pay deducted. So they went in, the factory collapsed. 1,000 people were dead. And part of the reason why the boss was not just you know, some absolute maniac capitalist. He had his own pressures, which were being forced on him by Western companies who were demanding quicker and quicker turnarounds to satisfy our desires for quicker and quicker products at cheaper and cheaper prices. So there was a moment anyway after the Rana Plaza collapse that fashion really saw the violence it was enacting and the exploitation it was enacting on Bangladesh and the global south. So we've had movements emerging from there that are really, really cool and really trying to make a difference, such as fashion academics creating equality, who are really at the forefront of decolonisation within the discipline. Karen Franklin's recently come to speak as part of our design cultures modules about diversity and inclusion. Fashion academics creating equality, if you don't know, is like a lobby group to try and insert people of color into the fashion world and also fashion schools within universities. So yeah, it gives people a platform to talk about their work and actively tries to get them involved in universities to get them in secure positions. So it's great stuff. Another initiative for Karen Franklin, which is not explicitly decolonial, but it is decolonial in a different way, is All Walks Beyond the Catwalk, which was a campaign group to move the fashion industry away from a kind of hegemonic idea of beauty, which was the kind of, I suppose, the size zero, white, you know, wave-like kind of model. So to embrace a more inclusive idea of beauty, which involves also a different kind of ethnicity as well. So All Walks Beyond the Catwalk is, I don't know, a kind of a lobby group for inclusion and diversity. And I see that as the same kind of process as decolonisation we're supporting. It's an article from 2013 by Karen Franklin. Is fashion racist, ageist, and fattist? Well, of course it has been, and you know, this is at the same time as Rana Plaza. It is racist and it is ageist and it is fattist. I would say it's kind of natureist, if that's a word as well. You know, being an ecologist, you know, it has a violent relationship, anthropocentric relationship to the world as well. You know, to the natural world. So it's speciesist as well. So it's all sorts of ists, or it has been historically. So I think decolonisation in fashion is not just a question of rebalancing kind of white privilege, but it's also rebalancing all sorts of other forms of exploitation and exclusion. But most of all, it's about reminding students that even behind something that is often, and I think this is a sexist and patriarchal myth, right? But fashion is often presumed to be some kind of apolitical or frivolous subject. And fashion students are often dismissed as somehow vacuous or, you know, airheaded or whatever, you know. Like I said, I think that's largely because of patriarchal sexism. That's not my experience at all. But one of the things that these myths do is they reproduce an idea that subjects are apolitical. You know, if you want to study politics, you go and study sociology or, you know, political science or economics or something like that, but not fashion. But I guess one of the things that post Rana Plaza has happened is that there's a realization that everything that we do is political. Not just the personal is political, but, you know, the stylistic is political as well. Everything we do has political repercussions. Creativity is political, and face call for students to start to think about, you know, not just what's taught, but who is teaching it, why what is being taught, or maybe questioning what is not being taught, you know, and for whose benefit. These are the key questions of decolonisation, right? Not just what is taught, but for whom, for whose benefit. This is my big interest at the moment. I'm not going to go heavily into Boaventura de Sousa Santos's work at the moment, other than to say he's probably, I think, the most important voice, not just within decolonial theory and not just within the global South, but just one of the most important voices in philosophy at the moment. So he's written a series of books about decolonization and what he calls the cognitive empire. Simply put, that all of the knowledge created by humanity to date has had a white Western bias. So everything that we think about in the world is kind of loaded within a kind of a white worldview. So every subject in some way reflects that. What he's trying to do is reinsert a kind of a Southern voice, a Southern way of thinking, or a marginalized or excluded way of thinking. He calls the university at the moment, the Western university, the abyssal university, like literally the university that's kind of in the abyss, and we need to move to the post-abyssal university. In fact, that's not a university with one voice, one white Western voice, but a pluriversity that is open to many different voices, all kind of talking, maybe in different languages, but all kind of coming from different perspectives, and speaking to each other and debating. That's what a pluriversity is about, or a polyphonic university. And I think this is what the Roads Must Fall kind of protests are about as well. They're not just about an acknowledgement that our universities are built on exploitation. They're about a call to say that our universities are still dominated by monocultures, and they need to kind of start becoming more pluriversal, more polyphonic. So within fashion, what I've been trying to do is to introduce more polyphony, which to get away from the academies, like get away from the jargon, is just literally to try and think about how we can get different voices into the module and different subjects. Oh, that's just a quote from Boaventura de Sousa Santos. The polyphonic university is a place where colleges of knowledge find a home, and where academics and citizens interested in fighting against cognitive capitalism, cognitive colonialism, and cognitive patriarchy will collaborate in bringing together different knowledges with full respect for their differences, whilst also looking for convergences and articulations. The purpose is to address issues that, in spite of having no market value, are socially, politically, and culturally relevant for communities of citizens and social groups. Will the non-commodified side of the university become a new popular university? We've already seen the campaign for the Free Black University, because universities are deemed to be absolutely hopelessly exclusive, hopelessly abyssal. Will it produce a new type of pluriversal knowledge, in which artisanal knowledges will be taken more seriously, and which decolonial mestizo knowledges will emerge? Mestizo is a name for the kind of mix of Latin American ethnicity with white European colonial ethnicity. So like a kind of a hybridity. There's a lot in that quote. It's brilliant, but I guess just to underline, one thing I'm trying to do with all of my teaching is not just to kind of deliver a curriculum, but to look for ways in which my kind of take on the world can converge and meet in dialogue with students' takes on the world and their knowledges, their cultures, and as much as possible, decolonization is about creating that fusion of that mestizo fusion of my ideas and the students' ideas, rather than delivering in an A to B format my ideas to a bunch of empty vessels who just become little versions of me, right? But yeah, another idea I think, which is mestizo, is the kind of artisanal knowledge of fashion designers mixed with the theoretical idea of philosophers. So I don't know. I think it's quite interesting to sort of think of fashion as a way of kind of philosophizing, or tell students that, creative students, that they can make political statements, or they can make or articulate their intellectual ideas about the world, not just through writing, but through making. So these are things that I'm interested in, these sort of hybrid forms of knowledges, and it's all part of decolonizing. And we do need to decolonize. This is something that Kate taught me in one of the sessions. This is a very simple. I think perhaps the categories in this I'm not too comfortable with: white male, white female, BIPOC male, BIPOC female. It could possibly be a little bit overly reductive, but even just doing a little exercise like this, if you don't know it, it's called the intersectionality matrix. So you just go through your teaching and learning materials and you tick in each box each time you've asked the students to read a book by a white male, a white female. It was unbelievable, the epiphany, when I looked through all my reading lists, and I consider myself quite right on, you know, and quite like open to intersectional ideas. It's unbelievable how much all of our curriculums are still dominated by the ideas of canonized white males. So just simple exercises like this that we've done this year have forced me to try and diversify the reading list. So I recommend everyone do this simple exercise. It only takes you about 5 minutes per module. It's eye-opening. The actual task of reinserting BIPOC males and BIPOC females, though, and finding their resources is a different question. That's harder to do, which is precisely the point, isn't it? But like I said, I think decolonization is not just about it's not just about ethnicity. It's also about a way of thinking, right? So as much as possible, I'm trying to decolonize fashion modules from what De Sousa Santos calls that white university episteme, which insists that, you know, students must read these certain styles of academic texts. So this is not an argument for anti-intellectualism, right? I'm not dismissing academic texts, but I'm just saying we shouldn't prioritize those above all other forms of knowledge, especially given if we're trying to decolonize and diversify our university, we need to start to talk to students in their language or the language of the social sphere that they surround themselves with. So I often begin my reading list from kind of zines, you know, or kind of visual communication. You think the zines are, again, frivolous and throwaway, but this is a fashion revolution zine, which tells you about the exploitation of labor involved in a t-shirt, an infographic about the supply chain, you know, all visually kind of framed. I'm starting a podcast this year. This is not mine, but just again to show you what great stuff. Every student goes around with their iPods, right? And, you know, their mobile phones, and they're digital natives. Why not begin learning materials from podcasts? So I'm starting a fashion theory podcast. This is an awesome one called The Wardrobe Crisis by Claire Press. An episode from a different one here about, this is a hot topic at the moment in fashion called waste colonialism. I don't know if you know the phrase waste colonialism, but it's when we in the West basically throw away all our discarded fast fashion clothes under the guise of benevolence so that we can say, hey, aren't we charitable? And what we do is we ship over, you know, tons and tons and tons of unwanted clothes and dump them on Africa, who don't really want them. Often they don't even ask for them, and certainly don't have the resources to dispose of them. So some get used and recycled, but most of it just creates waste that we dump on, you know, the South. So it's even more cynical than colonialism, that waste colonialism, I think, anyway. You can find out about all of this stuff through the wonder of Spotify and podcasts and Google Podcasts and Apple. So there's a whole world of knowledge available on the digital sphere that, you know, I'm trying to begin from. You know, we can always end at the text of De Sousa Santos, but there's certainly no reason why we have to begin there, especially for students who've maybe never read an academic text before. And like I said, the other place to begin is literally through making and the students' kind of interests. So wherever possible now, I try and begin all of these modules. When I want to introduce a theoretical idea, I begin from practice. So the idea of waste colonialism, I explained through a great British kind of decolonial label called Latings, who self-identify there as the design dialect of the diaspora. So they're kind of British African label, and they got famous for creating these handbags, which are made. You can kind of sort of see them there. They're made from the rice sacks of food aid parcels that are sort of scattered around the topography of Africa, or kind of like African countries that relied on food aid rice parcels. So I don't know, in turning these into a Western luxury commodity, they're doing something very interesting. They're kind of reminding us, you know, of the imbalance of power between the North and the South. They're reminding us of the legacies of colonialism at the same time as we kind of indulge in purchasing designer goods. I think it's something quite interesting. A handbag that's kind of maybe not decolonial, but a handbag that reminds us of colonialism and its others. I don't know if you could call it a handbag, actually. It's more versatile than that. But anyway, I mean, the other side of this as well is it's a great kind of form of sustainability and circular economy as well. The Latings are cool. Their whole website's full of stories about kind of what it's like to be at once a British designer and then at the same time not a British designer, if you see what I mean. British and a kind of an African designer. And they kind of wear that hybridity as a really cool badge of honor. You can tell by this website that they've got a kind of a funky kind of, I don't know, voice from the subaltern. The other one of my favorite artists that I look at the moment is Grace Wales Bonner, who recently graduated St. Martin's. And this is a designer that has so much to say. If anyone was to still try and perpetuate the idea that fashion designers have nothing to say or are in some way frivolous or vacuous, they should look at Grace Wales Bonner's work. There's not just kind of protest statements. She's really successful. She's just done a really interesting collaboration with Adidas, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But yeah, this is her fall winter collection from 2015, and you can see she's kind of like bringing the kind of stereotypes of Africa as maybe a place without fashion or devoid of fashion. That might be one racist stereotype. We like to think of ourselves as kind of the center of culture and of the I don't know, the so-called third world as a space without culture or devoid of culture, or somehow that needs our help getting towards culture. I think all of Grace Wales Bonner's work is about kind of bringing those two worlds together in a kind of a hybrid form to sort of say that neither is really kind of purely cultured. Yeah, her collaboration with Adidas is a really, really interesting comment on Britishness. So you have the kind of Adidas, which is a German company, of course, but popular with kind of as a form of sort of urban streetwear. But yeah, certainly it's a kind of a Western brand, but it's kind of used or worn as much by kind of black youths now. And then the way this is styled, it has kind of elements of Caribbean culture and Caribbean fashion, such as this skirt here, but also references to elite British establishment culture. So these are, I don't know, half like the cricket ties that you might see someone at the MCC at Lord's wearing, or the scarves that a student from Oxbridge would kind of have flowing behind them as they ride their bike past the camera there. And those colors and styles are kind of mixed up in a cool fusion of kind of Caribbean color and maybe like a hat for a sort of rasta. So there's an interesting kind of like comment on contemporary multiculturalism, but multiculturalism kind of makes it sound too neutral. I'm a little bit critical of the term multiculturalism because it kind of disguises the exploitation that's got on with the British project. I think you know, this is, I don't know, bringing establishment fashion down into the streets or bringing the streets up to high fashion. I don't know. There's something more political or more radical or a little bit more rebellious going on than just saying it's a blend of cultures here. Anyway, Grace Wales Bonner, awesome. I'm sure this is a reference to Bob Marley as well. There's the cut of this shirt here. It's a famous video. I think it's Iron Lion Zion, where Bob Marley is kind of playing football on the beach. You know, I'm sure that's a reference to. So it's kind of retro, but it's also retro with a political point, which makes you start to think of Bob Marley's comments on Babylon and so forth, in the spiritualism of reggae music. And Grace Wales Bonner, as well as being an amazing designer, was the stylist behind Steve McQueen's new set of films, Small Axe, which I'm sure many people here will have seen. If not, check it out. It's absolutely amazing. The second episode called Lovers Rock, I think, is one of the most perfect things that's ever been on British TV. Steve McQueen couldn't get this commissioned because it had an all-black cast and it was about an all-black experience, and it had a largely black production team. It couldn't get it commissioned still. It was a triumph that it was only because he won the Turner Prize eventually, and he became so famous for his Hollywood films that he actually got this commissioned. Otherwise, it would have, like many kind of black voices, remained marginalized or unheard. But anyway, the styling was done by Grace Wales Bonner, and the second episode, Lovers Rock, is all about this house party in Lewisham, where they set up a DIY sound system. And the clothes are just absolutely amazing. And there's some beautiful moments where they're like all dancing in slow motion in a kind of harmony to silly games. Or there's the Revolutionaries Kunta Kinte dub, which the dancing of these kind of young Lewisham, black bodies starts to seem like some kind of I don't know, literally uprising, like some southern uprising. It's really, really wonderful, evocative moments. But also, I don't know, it's just like a great image of joyful release and being young and being in love and kind of dressing up and living out your dreams temporarily in this bubble. Of course, as soon as they step outside this bubble of this house party, there's racism and there's all sorts of awful poverty and things like that, and violence. But in this, there's a protected space where, I don't know, people are dressing up and living this kind of amazing kind of like other life. I'm a bit of a record collector as well, so I love this scene where they're kind of knocking together their own sound system out of bits of junk and just setting up the party. It's cool. It's very DIY. But yeah, Grace Wales Bonner does the styling of it, and one of the things she's referencing in this is actually obviously the historical styles, but she's also referencing this book by a guy called John Goto, who was a photographer in the 70s. Now, just like Steve McQueen, although for longer, John Goto's book called Lovers Rock never got an audience, never got a publisher. So he basically went round Lewisham, the Lewisham Youth Centre, taking photos of all the kids and their fashion. So this is an era of insane racism in London. So Lewisham is near to New Cross, where there was the racist bombing of that house party, right? By supposedly, it's never come to justice, right? But supposedly by some kind of racist skinheads. It's also the era of loads of National Front marches, the Battle of Lewisham. Anyway, John Goto was going around taking photos of these kids. And they're just wonderful portraits of young people, with their lives ahead of them, but also, I don't know, just their style is just amazing. And this is kind of one of the things that Grace Wales Bonner is referencing in all of her collections. But the thing is, and I'm sure Grace Wales Bonner is not doing this because she's very articulate and very kind of politically charged. Every time she references the cut of one of these jackets in her design, she's not just doing some stylistic, superficial statement. She's referencing, the Battle of Lewisham, the racist National Front bombings, the politics of, this time, the racism and exclusion of black youth within the kind of British Empire that continues. So anyway, that's worth looking. It got published in 2013, ironically at the same time as the the Rana Plaza disaster when fashion was starting to get conscious. So look, I'm not having a go at the fashion industry per se. It's come a long way, and now we are getting like some really interesting voices starting to kind of difference the mainstream, and rightly so. It's fantastic. One way this is often described is that it is a bubbling up of the streets to the mainstream. But once again, I don't think that goes quite far enough to describe what I consider to be the politics of this, you know, and how important this is. So yeah, you can say that street fashion, to call it that, has bubbled up and influenced Adidas, you know, or you know maybe black designers are starting to get taken on board by historically white companies. Perhaps, yeah, and that would be something that I would applaud. But I prefer to go back to the thinker Homi K. Bhabha's notion of hybridity. So again, without going into this book, I'm gonna butcher the complexity of his argument. But he talks about colonialism, or at least post-colonialism, as creating this condition where it becomes like almost impossible to separate the colonizer's mentality and the colonized. Maybe that's probably not the right way to put it, but anyway, it creates this fusion of cultures, like a third space, a space of hybridity. And what that gets us past is thinking about just in terms of domination and the subversion of domination, but actually, when I think of Grace Wales Bonner's designs, and when I think of this sort of stuff, what I think of is that actually, for as long as I can remember, or certainly post Windrush anyway, Britain has always been hybrid, and to speak of a British culture is just as much of a fiction, you know, it's just a fiction. So, you know, the idea that there ever was a kind of a purely white colonial culture that would be superior to a purely black dominated culture, I think is an illusion. So I don't know, each time there's voices like this come into the mainstream, it reminds us that actually, you know, the voices that have justified colonialism for centuries are actually based on lies or fictions or discourses, and they can be changed by prioritizing other voices and bringing them to the mainstream. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed that whistle stop tour through colonial and post-colonial fashion. If you haven't seen Grace Wales Bonner's stuff, I'm not on commission. Check it out. And if you haven't seen Steve McQueen's amazing Lovers Rock episode of Small Axe, but all of Small Axe, check that out too. Yeah, thanks. And thanks for inviting me to speak.
Wow, thank you, Richard.
Right.
That was amazing. I think it really kind of captures those kind of how multi-layered decolonizing is and how ingrained, you know, is the systemic racism and the colonialism. That's really eye-opening, and it is that whole thing around fashion that it speaks and operates on so many levels, doesn't it? So it's actually such a powerful medium. I don't know whether anybody's got any questions or any comments that they would like to share. Hardeep's put in the chat, Richard, wow, this was great, learnt so much.
Thanks.
She loves the term multiversity.
Yeah.
3 people have agreed, so there you go.
Oh, I'm glad. Well, that's the main thing.
Yeah. Tel said, so thought-provoking. Hardeep, sorry, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Thank you. No, thank you very much, Richard. I'm going to come in for 2 purposes, really. One, to actually make a request, and one, to actually ask you a question. So, absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Very thought-provoking, and lots for us to go away and think about. And great just to hear just the level of work that's going on in terms of decolonising fashion. So you focused a lot about how you can decolonise the curriculum, okay, in terms of what you're presenting to your students. I was wondering if you could kind of give us an insight into the diversity of your student profile. So what kind of students are engaging in the programs that you're delivering? Is there a diversity of students? If there is, great. If there isn't, okay, what are you or the program faculty doing to trying to encourage more diverse students to engage in programs being delivered by your department?
Yeah, I mean, given that I'm the kind of contextual studies lecturer and not the program leader, it's not my direct responsibility. That's not passing the buck. But one thing I would say is that there are a few things that I know the fashion courses are doing really a lot in, but it is one of the most diverse universities and fashion schools I've ever worked at, and I mean that by a long way. So I had work in Leeds, which was almost entirely white. Now coming to De Montfort, what's brilliant is that it's over 50% of the students who identify as BIPOC, and that's the same, you know, in fashion. And it brings a real energy to not just the course, but it brings an energy to these theoretical studies modules. Now, just as one example, like one thing I didn't talk about is how much I want to try and begin from students' examples, often which make me completely on the back foot, as it were. Not that I'm bothered about that, because the point of my teaching is not to try and show off how erudite I am and for other students to copy me, but to try and emancipate students. That's what I think of as the process of education. So anyway, one thing we do in the first weeks is begin from something that the students want to write about, you know. So we've had students wanting to write about MIA, the Sri Lankan British rapper, who I knew only through the fact that she sampled The Clash, who I'm a big fan of. So I knew it through the white gaze, right? But in the process of that student learning about MIA, who she liked, and I learned about her Sri Lankan background, I learned about Sri Lankan fashion. I realized that the university has not so much on Sri Lankan fashion, and actually on the internet there's not so much on Sri Lankan fashion. So we're going to have to try and kind of learn ways to find that information together as a sort of form of co-learning. That's just a long-winded way of saying that, you know, what the university needs to do is to stop thinking of itself as the site of knowledge, which it transfers to students, and it starts to begin from the students' worlds and start to think of itself as the facilitator of a co-learning journey. Now, I can't speak about what the university is doing in terms of outreach, given the profile, because I just don't know. So, but given the profile, I'd suspect that it's actually working hard at that. I know that the Stephen Lawrence Centre is doing some amazing scholarships and so forth. I don't think any of those have reached the School of Fashion and Textiles, or even if they're allowed in that scheme. But I think they should be, if they're not. But yeah, I mean,
probably worth having a conversation with the program leaders to see what kind of outreach work they're doing, because there's some, like you said, I'm just so glad to hear that there is a diversity in your student body, as well as you championing that diversity in the curriculum. And my second is a request, and I'll move on to give somebody else the space to come in and ask questions, is as part of the Decolonising DMU project work, we are developing a toolkit, and we're always looking for case studies. This would, what you talked about today would formulate a very good case study. So I was wondering if I could just perhaps contact you via email and just follow that up separately, if that's something you may not be interested in. But I don't want to take any more space, because I appreciate the fact there might be others that have got pressing questions to ask.
No, it's important, Hardeep, and I mean, just at the risk of underlining, one of the things we do need to do, the next stage, though, the ultimate stage, I think, is to get more people of colour in the faculty delivering these courses. You know, because inescapably, I mean, I can be an ally to this, you know, and I can facilitate this process, but ultimately what we want is more representation in terms of the kind of academic faculty. terms of
And I
like
think that's
marginalised
really,
people.
I think that's really important, especially if you've got that diversity in
Yeah,
among
definitely.
students. But no, thank Richard again. I loved it. Thank you.
No, it's an honour. Thanks, Hardy.
Thanks. Has anybody else got any questions or comments that they would like to share? And everyone, I have to say this is another request, Richard. What also struck me when you were talking, because you were referencing various books, we have various ongoing displays in the library, and I wondered whether you'd be interested in either kind of picking a theme or looking at that theme around sort of, well, it is that kind of the whole, you know, sort of knowledge production and global knowledge and sort of influence of, or over influence of colonialism, and how we kind of push against that. That's, you know, something, or something else. I may be working with the ADH librarians, so perhaps Carol and Sharon, who are both on the call at the moment, and Anne Collick as well, who's heavily involved in the displays. I don't know whether Carol and Sharon have any thoughts around that, whether.
Yeah, that sounds a really good idea. Yeah, so do get in touch, Richard, and we can arrange something. Yeah.
Sorry, just giving you more work, Richard. But we do find with the displays, people do take the books, and they do, you know, it's a good way of kind of getting stuff out there, and you know, when people are interested.
No, it's important work, and it's essential that you know, all of these things are as visible as possible for the reasons I just sketched. You know, because these voices have been invisible within the university for so long. Yeah, so anything that promotes visibility of kind of the other or marginalised voices is worthy of support, and I'll always try and chip in where I can. But just to remind everyone, you know, you can feel comfortable in wearing your Adidas Grace Wellborn or trainers or whatever, or even the choices of music that you listen to, right? You know, they're forms of reinserting different voices into the how would you describe it, into the epistemic or intellectual space of the kind of white colonizers world, right? Right. Yeah. We can all do little things, can't we?
Yeah, and I think that was something else that struck me was, you know, when you were talking about kind of almost that a way of introducing other voices, and trying to use kind of formats that you think the students are perhaps more familiar with in the first instance. So things like podcasts, things like zines, you know, they're all great resources. They're not seen as, you know, they're not orthodox academic resources, but it's a great way of, you know, pulling in other voices, you know, giving space, giving time for the students connect. And yes, you can introduce other things later, but you've also got a mark of comparison then as well. And you've got a point where, as you've already said, you can get students to start questioning. And I liked the way you were talking about, you know, when you said getting students to start thinking about, you know, well, what is it I'm being taught, and, you know, and why is it, you know, who's teaching me, and, you know, why is that, and, you know, what am I being taught for whose benefit, kind of thing, and giving them the tools and, well, the confidence and almost like the right, if you like, to ask those kind of questions. So that does chime a lot with a lot of stuff we've done in the library or are doing in the library. So
one of the things that I'm increasingly struggling with is that we have a diverse student body. I teach the kind of academic module, which historically has been assessed via essays, writing. And one of the things we do a lot, we spend more time teaching students to write in a university academic voice in a way that we want them to write, so that they can be assessed against other students who probably have had a load more experience in writing like that. Anyway, we'd spend over half the module teaching students to write in a certain way that we like, rather than actually concentrating on asking them what they want to say. So there's no time for them to like spend on articulating a point about their world, because they're just concerned with how they write it to please the gaze of the university, which I think is really, really problematic. Audre Lorde, can't dismantle a master's house with the master's tool, and that's true. And again, I don't want to say get rid of academic writing, or that's a place you can end up at, and often, you know, sometimes if you really want to be heard by the system, sometimes you do have to kind of learn how to speak in a certain language, otherwise you just don't ever get heard. But that problem about maybe concentrating too much on like teaching people to conform to a certain voice rather than asking people what it is that they want to say about the world is a massive problem. And you know, zines, I think, are a place where young people express themselves without really worrying about how they say things. You know, they're just getting a message out, and there's a lot of freedom in that, and there's a lot of funkiness as well, and a lot of fun. So I like to show students those and share those with students as well.
No, that's great. And I think a lot of what you're saying, I know a lot of people on the call have already attended, you know, a couple of the sessions already. So Blessing Marandure has done some research with Black psychology students and looking at what their experience is and how they share their experience, and all those points around, you know, having to adopt a different voice, having to learn to engage with other cultures, or either maybe stepping away from that because they find it overwhelming, or, you know, there's other sort of difficulties to encounter on the way. I think that chimes well with what you're just saying. Sorry, Hardeep, I've just noticed you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Kay. Just a couple of points. Just picking up on your point about assessment, and I think you make a very valuable point there about trying to diversify this assessment so it's fit for purpose. Okay, and I think, you know, as program teams, we've got to decide what that fit for purpose is. Okay, and not just think always squarely within the box that this is what we want them to do. So, you know, if anything, I'd empower you to think about diversifying your assessment, especially when you've got a culturally diverse and rich curriculum. You know, if your assessment isn't inclusive, it just undermines the work that you're doing in building that, you know, decolonise and inclusive curriculum. If actually the way that students can express their knowledge and understanding is very narrow. So, you know, push those boundaries, and that I would encourage you to do so. My second point would be kind of linked to what you said, that there is a need for greater representation within the faculty staff, in terms of staff who are teaching it. And I suppose there's always this issue about, okay, we have student diversity at undergraduate level, but maybe that isn't mirrored at postgraduate or postgraduate research level. You know, maybe there's lack of opportunities or lack of diversity. Or is it to do with recruitment? You know, is it that people are applying for posts, okay, at DMU, particularly within your faculty or your department, and they're not being appointed? Or simply are there not enough individuals within that field which allows that employment of that diversity? And I think that does need closer attention. Now, I'm not saying that's anything for you to look at, Richard. I just think collectively as an institution, we do need to look at who's applying for posts and then who's being appointed, and also look at the number of students at that postgraduate research level that might think about having that career into academia. But certainly I agree with you, having role models is crucial, because if they don't exist, they might not aspire to go down that route. And it's a bit of a catch-22 situation, isn't it? And then how do you actually address that? But just a comment. Thank you.
No, absolutely, and I know the fashion world, that there are plenty of role models now. I mean, they're often London centric, but Vogue UK now, despite often the stereotypes of Vogue, under Edward Enninful, it's got a black editor in chief. It's one of the most diverse fashion magazines in the world at the moment. It's really interesting, and the stuff he's done since taking over British Vogue. So yeah, I mean, one of the things is that the fashion world does have kind of role models now, but, you know, at the risk of, you know, pushing the boundaries of my employer a little bit, we can do more to get to be more representative in the School of Fashion and Textiles, which I think on the academic faculty, not that diverse, I would say. So that's it.
Okay. Well, I don't know whether anyone else has got any other comments or questions that they would like to make. No, I think we've all. Well, in that case, I'd just like to say a big thank you, Richard, for something that's obviously been very thought-provoking and has given us a lot of food for thought and generated extra work, as these all things always do. But that's a positive and a real insight into the fashion world and, as I say, how multi-layered it is, and that whole need for decolonising throughout. You know, it's different strata. So.
Okay.
So
thank you everyone for coming.
Fashioned facts here, actual genuine ones. So
thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, everybody. I shall stop.